Welcome to Next Economy Now. I'm Kevin Bayuk, a partner and worker owner at Lyft Economy. Lyft is an impact consulting firm whose mission is to create, model, and share a locally self-reliant economy that works for the benefit of all life. The goal of this podcast is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, democratic, transparent, and whole systems approach to using business as a force for good. My guest today is Matthew Monahan, co-founder and CEO of the 150-person technology company and certified B Corp, Inflection. Matthew is humble. He's a successful entrepreneur, a thoughtful and compassionate human being, and a leading steward of the emerging ethic of service and giving through enterprise and through appropriate application of technology. I enjoyed hearing how Matthew and his brother, co-founder of Inflection, have expressed their generosity in the way they have integrated a for-profit and nonprofit model. The Namaste Foundation, which they started when they sold a portion of Inflection, owns 10% of the business. The company also voluntarily dedicates a portion of revenue and employee time to diverse expressions of service in the community. What surprised me in talking to Matthew was learning about the vision of how Inflection is extending its core technology to begin to support new possibilities in restorative justice. I also enjoyed hearing his enthusiasm for New Zealand as a prime launchpad for innovating on practices to address the core problems of our time, like climate change and social inequities. In the interview, you'll hear Matthew share about some of the groups and organizations that the Namaste Foundation is supporting, such as Inspiral and Mindful Schools, which are developing scalable models for transforming how we live, how we organize, and how we communicate to create that more beautiful world that we know is possible. Matthew also shares some insights on corporate culture, technology, and the pressures imposed by capitalization. Without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Matthew Monahan. Welcome to the Next Economy Now podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. I guess I'd love to start just hearing a little bit about your story. What projects are you engaged with now? And maybe if you could give me a summary navigation of how you got to where you are, what motivated you, what are some of the high points of your journey?
Sure. Well, it's a privilege to join you here. My brother and I, we grew up in the Midwest, and we came out to Silicon Valley about 10 years ago. We had the entrepreneurial itch. We both dropped out of college and started a company called Inflection. And we figured we'd do it, for a year or two, and didn't necessarily have the long-term vision all baked at that time. But, essentially the thesis of the company was that government records and data were moving online, and that good technology could help to organize the data, make it accessible in the appropriate and responsible ways, add important layers of privacy to that and transparency. And that ultimately led us into creating a family history website called archives.com to help people trace their family tree. And we sold that business in 2012 to Ancestry, and we're extremely fortunate and privileged to do so. And then on the commercial side, we decided to deploy our technology against the employment screening markets and identity verification, where essentially you have these very personal, high trust related interactions. And we've built a business called goodhire.com. We've got about 35,000 companies that use the service. And what we're really seeking to do is make the background checks process a restorative experience for people rather than a punitive one, helping both companies and job seekers develop more trust in the hiring process itself. Also, starting in about 2013, using some of the proceeds from our company that was acquired, we started a foundation called the Namaste Foundation. And essentially what we seek to do there is support exceptional nonprofits who are creating a more beautiful world, especially ones who may not otherwise be getting the same amount of attention or funding from the philanthropic community. We tend to focus on the environmental and education space. It's been a real privilege to hear a lot of great stories and see, as you do, so many amazing people doing hopeful things for a peaceful, more regenerative, and more just society. And so we do everything we can, in the time that we can to support these types of endeavors. And excited to dive in on any of those topics and more, but that's a bit of the story.
Wonderful, Matthew. Thank you for sharing that. I am curious about a number of things. one thing that comes to mind is the motivation to start the foundation. A number of companies, enterprises take some of the proceeds from their work and start philanthropic organizations. But what motivated you to do that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think fundamentally it's if I'm being honest, it's the grief and the recognition that, we live in a world where there are a lot of challenges and a lot of challenges ahead. And so we want to do our part. It's a very natural human tendency, in my estimation, to give back when one has any sort of privilege. And I think service is a natural part of the human condition. We were just fortunate to be able to get started on that a bit earlier with the resources available through the businesses that we had begun. We also do think it's important to think about how for-profit and nonprofit models can work together in a more integrated way. So for us, the foundation owns 10% of our business. We do have, 1% of all revenue, employee time, and those two dimensions, also committed to volunteer community service. In our company at Inflection, we really celebrate giving back to the community depending on, what people want to do. There's a wide range of ways that people can serve and give their gifts. As company leadership, we really see it as a privilege to be able to steward those types of opportunities and enable them and catalyze them the best we can. We're just a small business in the grand scheme of things, but I think if the entire business community can rally in that sort of direction and spirit, we'll live in a fundamentally better world.
Yeah, thank you. How many people currently work at Inflection?
So we're at 150 people across 3 global offices, and we're having a good time. We recently announced, and I think that was part of the context of getting connected with you, recently announced that we became a certified B Corp. So we're really excited about this movement and this concept of using business as a force for good and really considering all stakeholders in the actions that we take as a business. And for us, it's just a terrific symbol that embodies the qualities and characteristics that we want to live, while also being a real structure and a real legal structure and a real way to create higher levels of accountability for businesses.
Excellent. And congratulations on becoming a certified B Corp. What's the longer term vision for Inflection? Kind of what's next, or what's the trajectory? I'm curious what you and the team are thinking about.
Sure. What's really alive for us right now is we're working a lot around what are the downstream effects of the criminal justice system as it relates to the employment screening process. As you may know, there's approximately 70 million people in the United States that have a criminal record. And the whole system of mass incarceration has really gotten out of control. America has the highest incarceration rates by far of countries in the world. Sadly, it's incredibly discriminatory against African Americans, Hispanics, and other minorities. What happens is after someone has an interaction with the criminal justice system, oftentimes their criminal record becomes kind of a scarlet letter, and it reduces their ability to access employment as well as public housing, different forms of benefits, and so on. And so what we're kind of witnessing is that as technologists and as stewards of a commercial technology enterprise, we have a chance to really help reinvent this system as it moves online. And so as the criminal justice system becomes digitized, there's just a fundamental opportunity and a window in time to rethink some of the fundamental premises of this. And we're really excited about the restorative justice movement, which has really pioneered a different methodology and way of thinking about criminal justice and, how do we repair harm and create healing mechanisms in our local communities, and what is the role of digital tools in enabling that. So that's what we're most excited about at the moment. We're having a chance to talk to people, firsthand who are experiencing this in the job search process. We've had the privilege to go inside prisons and get a chance to interact more with different communities and really develop a better sense of the scope of the problem, which is quite large, and what kinds of tools we can build to help address that.
Wonderful. So even in these times of immense uncertainty, the possibility exists for kind of some of these marginalized ideas. Restorative justice has absolutely been around and practiced all over the world, but in the, say, affluent world or the United States, it still remains a marginalized idea. But maybe what I'm hearing is you're sensing that there's opportunities to maybe leverage technology and tools to support the emergence of a more restorative approach to background checks as part of restoring community.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it is a challenging time that we live in. There's no question about it in my mind. For instance, one thing that we now do as part of our products is we give people a chance to transparently retrieve their information and append their own voice and stories to it. So if you think about the background screening process, it's traditionally, it's kind of a cavity search. You don't really have a lot of control. You have to go through it. It's not transparent. And your past behavior is essentially dehumanized into simple bits and bytes of, felon, aggravated assault, and that's it. And we put these labels on people. Oh, this person's a criminal. And so, simple stuff. But what we found was that the best way to humanize that experience is to create more story and to give people a chance to tell their own stories. And so rather than the records being nameless and faceless, giving people a chance to contextualize what was going on in their life, what kind of traumas and what kind of hardships maybe that they faced, and then what they've done to restore the harms that they've potentially created, what types of behaviors that they now are adhering to, what kinds of values. And so we're getting all these just tremendous humbling stories from people. And what it does for the person on the other side of the interaction, like an employer, is really give them a chance to more holistically say, do I forgive this person, or do I look past this mistake in this person's past? We've all made so many mistakes in our lives. And so in that respect, our vision and our hope is that it can be a more restorative process. These types of ideas, like you said, are not necessarily new. So I think they just require the wherewithal to really hold on to faith that we can build more positive systems in whatever line of work that we're in, whatever enterprise, whatever context. It doesn't have to be entrepreneurship. It doesn't have to be technology. But I think we all have, a bit of agency in this that we can pursue even amongst, some of the more discouraging events.
Wonderful. One of the things that's fascinating, I think, for me in hearing that is I can't think of many other examples yet where technology is effectively being utilized to create empathy or empathic connection beyond just enemy images or labels. And that's exciting to me because I can imagine adjacent spheres of human activity where the technology can be leveraged in that way. So I'm really excited that this is part of the work that you're moving into. I guess maybe that's a question. Do you see, do you and your team circulate in a community of peers that we would call Silicon Valley or technology? I mean, obviously there's multiple dimensions to all of you and your team, but do you connect with and maybe partially self-identify as part of the technology community? And are you optimistic about some of the other initiatives that are using technology as a force for good?
It's a great question. We do self-identify as a Silicon Valley based company as part of the technology community. Certainly, we have our opinions about certain trends and certain ways that it's developing, for both good and less. But I would say we see a tremendous number of examples, both in the for-profit and nonprofit communities, of people really creatively building things for good and using vehicles of business for good. I'll give you an example that I know you're familiar with. There's a group out of New Zealand, out of Wellington, New Zealand, called Lumio. Lumio is an open source, free piece of software that helps people make collaborative decisions together, and essentially creates a democratized effect amongst groups of individuals to be able to organize more efficiently and really make decisions in a more collaborative manner that builds empathy and trust amongst communities. It was born out of the Occupy movement and is run by some phenomenal people that really are intent on doing good in the world. And New Zealand is filled with actual examples. We've been incredibly impressed with the New Zealand community in particular at their forward-looking social enterprise approach in terms of how we use technology and business for a force of good.
Great example. Yeah. So finally utilizing technology to facilitate effective dialogue, deliberation, collective decision-making, some of the chief challenges of our time of understanding each other and moving forward together as collectives, as a common unit. Tell me about New Zealand. How did you discover this amazing crew in New Zealand, and what's your connection or growing connection to some of the work that's happening there?
I'm glad you asked. So my brother and I went on vacation in New Zealand in 2010, and we just fell in love with the country and have been really deepening our relationship with it ever since. We have a home base out there now with family and friends, and we're working on a number of projects that we're privileged to be involved with. Notably, New Zealand has just announced a new framework around its visa policies called the Global Impact Visa. And the Global Impact Visa is for entrepreneurs and investors and change makers of all types to move to New Zealand and be involved in New Zealand and essentially create these world-changing enterprises from the community there. And so that's actually just launching in early 2017. Already, entrepreneurs from all over the world are expressing interest, and it's being done with a nonprofit partnership in a fellowship format called the Edmund Hillary Fellowship, ehf.org. New Zealand is an incredibly progressive country with, people know it for its natural beauty. Over a third of the land is stewarded by the Department of Conservation. And there's large-scale permaculture and regenerative agriculture projects that are being stewarded there. And really the overwhelming sense of being in New Zealand is that there's this aliveness and sense of possibilities to help build solutions in a more integrated way and to really rapidly deploy them both within the country as well as around the world. Because, policies and governments and politics are just tough in a lot of countries. And, to create these types of regenerative models around addressing the challenges of climate change and various social challenges and income inequality, we really need the type of canvas and the type of raw materials to get things done quickly, to be able to move fast and deploy and execute. And that is, in essence, what New Zealand offers entrepreneurs and investors. And that's why we're really excited about it.
Wonderful. So New Zealand, as a canvas, it plays this role where we can experiment, innovate, and then deploy and even showcase proof of concepts that can scale, at least appropriate to the islands, and then demonstrate replicable models that could be adopted elsewhere. And the conditions are ripe there at this moment in time, is what I'm hearing, for some of that rapid iteration and rapid deployment, given the timeliness of the problems we're trying to solve. Super exciting, really enthusiastic that you're engaging. Maybe can you elaborate on what role or how you're engaging with that?
Yeah, it's been a huge privilege. We got involved a few years ago, and the immigration department asked us, for our help on what type of visa policies might be possible. And from start to finish, within 18 months, it went from idea to being fully passed into law, which, not only is incredibly fast for government time, but if you imagine all the intricacies of immigration and visas and the politics involved in that, it was really a case study and proof point that when you have low barriers of entry with a government that is, consistently rated the least corrupt government, the most honest government in the world, with a highly educated population, with a Kiwi can-do spirit and humble attitude, with a real honoring of the relationship with the indigenous culture, the Maori. New Zealand's the largest Polynesian population in the world, and really sets a tremendously positive example, even though there's still a lot of work to be done around indigenous relations in particular. And so we've just been riding this wave. We have a number of collaborators, and there's many people involved in this project. And so we're co-creators on it and just doing our part.
Wonderful. Does the Namaste Foundation play a role in that work? And even if not, I'm kind of curious about the vision or the collective vision for where the Namaste Foundation goes from here. Maybe as part of that, if you can maybe share some examples of some of these wonderful NGOs that you've been able to support or are looking forward to supporting, just to give our listeners of the podcast a flavor of the type of work that you do through the foundation.
Definitely. So our vision, we're 4 years into the Namaste Foundation now. We've done about $1 million in gifts across 100 or so organizations. And that's really given us a chance to understand, more about the ecosystem. We're still very much newbies and beginners in this, but more about the ecosystem, talking to a lot of different executive directors, going to different conferences and events and so forth. I think our general impression is that philanthropy is undergoing a lot of change. No surprise there. There's a lot of new wealth that's being created in the technology community that is more apt to make its way into philanthropy. But there's, different philanthropic models and opinions about what are the right ways to deploy that for social change and good that are still, very much a work in progress and being culturally defined. We see ourselves as a small foundation most able to make change or contribute to change by really, first and foremost, supporting organizations the best way we can. as we find opportunities to be uniquely helpful, whether that's through introductions or advice or just straight money and financial resources. But then secondly, creating more networking opportunities to bring some of these projects together. One thing that surprised us about the nonprofit space is that it's actually much more competitive than we expected, because everyone's competing after resources and grants. And so, even though you would think that more, I guess, in the for-profit context, it's actually quite true in the nonprofit context, but often we're all trying to accomplish the same thing. And so I think the connective tissue between organizations is going to be really important as we build these new movements and as we build these new systems and paradigms. Some examples of what we're involved in: we do a lot of localized gifts in both Silicon Valley as well as New Zealand, since we're most familiar with the places and it's the face-to-face interactions that we're able to get. I'll give you an example of another New Zealand group called Inspiral, which is a social enterprise community that Lumio actually is involved with as well. Inspiral set forth the banner of mission of helping people do stuff that matters, helping more people do stuff that matters, and really just enabling meaningful work. And so they're really pioneers at some of the new organizational models. And how do we, kind of in the reinventing organizations language, how do we really up-level the ways that we do business together and we create projects together? So that's kind of an example of a group locally here in the Bay Area. A favorite that comes to mind is a group called Mindful Schools. They reach over 750,000 students now, teaching mindfulness in classrooms. We're really impressed with the leadership and team there. They've created a very sustainable and scalable model to essentially help kids learn how to pay attention, how to think about their breathing, how to listen, and very basic things that we've somehow lost sight of in our education system. And so they help certify teachers and train teachers at mindfulness themselves, and then how to teach it and bring it into the students' lives. And just demonstrable improvement in all sorts of things, and really quite effective. So those are the types of groups, and we hope to do what you're doing in terms of tell stories and help spread the word and just really showcase positive examples and help people hear that, hey, all these great things are happening, and maybe the mainstream media doesn't always cover them and so forth, but we have agency here and we can help support each other.
Awesome. That's really, really good work, good examples. How do you think about the culture at Inflection as a container for personal growth and development or transformation? Is there things that you're doing or thinking about in terms of working with the 150 people that are working on the Inflection project in terms of those vectors? I'm just curious about, I guess a broader question, curious about how you think about the values of the company Inflection and how you live into those values through habits, norms, and behaviors that kind of make up the culture.
Definitely. We've been incredibly blessed with a great culture really from the outset. We got some early advice that said, make sure you build a company that you want to work for. And we took that to heart. And 10 years later, we're still working for a company that we really love to work for. So the reason that Inflection's had 10 years of staying power to date is because of the culture, because it attracts good people. It helps to engender excellence in terms of how we perform together. And our overarching company mission is to build trust online. And so that has to start within our four walls as an organization. All sorts of cultural practices to ensure that we're engendering trust up and down the whole stack here. So business doesn't have to be as impersonal as it is sometimes. We try to really recognize first and foremost that we're a group of people that come to work together, that end up spending a lot of time together, more time than often, our families and our close families, to let's level set and make sure that we're enjoying each other's company and healing things that need to be healed or saying things that need to be said, creating the right space for hard conversations, the right rhythms and habits. So we really think about the seasons of the business, the quarters of the business. How do we create systemized, scalable habits together? That's time outside of work. That's things like we have something we call the mindfulness minute at the beginning of our all hands, where a different person volunteers to really just share something personal or something that's inspiring them, that's alive for them. And then we take a minute to just really sit with it as an organization. Some people might think that sounds super new agey and crazy. Other people are like, oh, only a minute. But we're finding the right balance for us. And culture is very much not a top-down thing. It's something that's emergent. It's a set of properties, and I believe the values as well that really emerge from the team. So our value setting exercises over the years have been, a participatory process, and we've continue to evolve our values. They haven't changed radically in 10 years, but they've continued to I think, improve or strengthen as well as evolve. And so we just, I guess, place an importance on this conversation, and we try to keep it as real and as transparent as possible. We make a ton of mistakes. In terms of, you said, personal growth, like, I feel like this company has taught me so much, and, I'm constantly humbled by, all the dumb things that we've done and that I've done. So that's part of it as well. You learn as you go, and you just get back up and keep going.
Appreciate that vulnerability and sharing that, and also just inspired by the polishing and crafting and continual work and iteration and all the observing you've done and continue to do. Do you sense that in other areas of Silicon Valley that capitalization and financing models pressure other companies in ways that forego some attention to culture? Is that an observation that you're privy to, or do you have any comments on that idea?
Yeah. My experience is that this stuff is just really hard, and the expectations that get placed, and that the need for incredible speed and efficiency, there's just tremendous pressures put on management teams, on entrepreneurs, on investors, in order to be sustainable and successful. And so I think that the financialization and capitalization of technology and the continued trends in that respect absolutely, move forward that pressure in a way that creates a sometimes fixation on short-term, aspects of whether it's relationships with employees, relationships with customers, or whatever. It's a tough balance, because at the same time, we're witnessing inflection points across the whole board of how technology can improve our lives, and, a need for speed in order to be competitive. And so there's just a whole number of trade-offs and interesting things to balance, and each company and each entrepreneur will find their way and their approach. But I do worry that the financialization of these companies does essentially preclude the option to really create more holistic and more regenerative models for people. We've taken one round of outside financing in our history back in 2010. We still work with the investors on our board, and we have great relationship and great partners, and partners who have been just unflinchingly supportive of our decision to move to B Corp, to create the Namaste Foundation, and so on. And so we've been very blessed in terms of finding those partners that are values aligned. And I think that's probably the advice I would have for anyone who's thinking about these things is, lead with values, and make sure you're doing business with people that you really trust and that you enjoy working with, and the rest will find its way.
Deeply in accord with that sentiment. What projects beyond the ones that you're working with, are there any other projects that come to mind that are inspiring you right now, that are keeping you lit and activated, or just excited or enthusiastic?
Yes. How much time do I have? My future sister-in-law runs a company called One Earth Designs. Her name is Catlin Powers, and she's really inspiring me these days. One Earth Designs is behind a tool called Soul Source, which is a solar cooker, and is really I think a linchpin in some of the decentralized energy models that can emerge in empowering people to really have more independence and empowerment around their energy, their food, and their water system. One Earth Designs has been a B Corp for a long time, and a very highly rated one. So that project gets me fired up, hearing the conversations between my brother Brian and Catlin and all the things that are going on there is very exciting.
Great example. Really, really important work. I'm curious if, for the listeners of the podcast who are looking for examples of this next economy that's emerging, if you have any requests of things that you would love to see them do, and get how they might be activated to either support your work or support work that you care about, or things that they might check out or read. Do you have any requests?
Sure. I think that part of this new movement of impact entrepreneurship and social enterprises in a regenerative economy is really one of solidarity and one of gift. And so I think if we all can support one another in different ways, B Labs and the B Corp movement is a perfect example. They've done a phenomenal job, and would love to see more entrepreneurs and companies embrace the framework and really commit to being responsible to all stakeholders, not just financial shareholders, in the ways that they run their business. In terms of other things to recommend, I would give a plug for the book, The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible by Charles Eisenstein. It's a personal favorite of mine, but it really crystallizes a lot of things that people who've read it that I know found it tremendously valuable in their lives. And so that's a good one to check out, but really anything that Charles Eisenstein is writing.
Agreed. Thanks for sharing that. Is there anything else that you'd like to share about Namaste, Inflection, or anything that comes to mind that can keep us all informed about this next economy that's emerging?
Well, certainly, everyone's invited to visit our websites and follow us. We're at inflection.com and namaste.org for the foundation work, and ehf.org for some of the New Zealand work. Yeah, I guess I would just say if these ideas are resonant, or if there's anything that we can be useful on to help catalyze projects or be supportive to this ecosystem, please don't hesitate to reach out. The contact forms on all those websites. We'd be happy to engage in a conversation. And if you're listening to this podcast, then I imagine you're interested in similar things as we are. So, we're really excited about catalyzing communities of entrepreneurs and change makers, and really supporting different projects as we all embark on this work together.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you for everything that you've shared. Thank you for the important work that you're doing. Thank you for holding the line on your ethics and integrity. It's courageous to be a pioneer, to take a stand and make choices, acknowledging both your privilege and the opportunity to be of service, and living into your values when culture at large doesn't necessarily yet support you fully. I appreciate your perseverance, your courage, and all the great work that you're doing and continue to do.
The feeling's very, very mutual, and thanks for creating this platform and for the work you're doing, Kevin.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our past episodes, visit www.lifteconomy.com. You can also subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Overcast, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Before we finish, I wanted to insert a quick request for support for a newer Lift project, the Force for Good Accelerator and Development Fund. It's the first crowdfunded accelerator and fund purpose-built to support and develop best for the world B Corps. Those are the B Corps that score in the top 10th percentile of all B Corps, and who set the models for how the economy can provide for human needs while benefiting all life. The fund prioritizes women-owned and person-of-color-owned enterprises, and also has a bias towards enterprises that embrace democracy in governance and ownership, as well as those enterprises that address climate change through their core operations. We've raised over $400,000 at the time of this recording, and are very excited about the overwhelming support we've received so far from over 104 investors. To learn more, please visit www.wefunder.com/forceforgood. That is www.wefunder.com/forceforgood. We are incredibly grateful for your support. You can also find out more about Lift Economy at www.lifteconomy.com. As always, thanks for listening.